It is Friday, July 11th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Atsu episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The July PS Plus Essential lineup, still live on PSN. Make sure you claim those games. And also this coming Tuesday, on the 15th, we have the PS Plus Extra and Premium lineup going live as well, which one of these games is available right now, and that is the big standout headline title, easily, Cyberpunk 2077. So you can download that and play it right now, which there's also a tie-in here, so you get Phantom Liberty for sale, so that content is not included, but in theory, the whole idea is play your Cyberpunk, download it with extra, and then you can also pay for the Phantom Liberty expansion if you are into the game, but that is easily a big headline title. Also alongside that is Abiotic Factor, which that's a day one launch, which will not happen until July 22nd, so that's a little bit further out, but otherwise the rest of the games are going live on the 15th, and that is Banisher's Ghost of Eden, Bluey the video game, great if you have kids, Planet Zoo, Risk of Rain 2, Tropico 6, and New World Eternum. And then going into PS Plus Premium, we have the two games we already knew about, which is Twisted Metal 3 and 4 for PS1, which will also be first-time debuts in Europe, which is of note as well. But otherwise, that is what we're looking at. July, I think, is really strong, if only because you do have not only a day one launch happening later towards the end of the month, but obviously Cyberpunk is a big one as well, which is also always a bit strange in that, I mean, it's obviously great, but a lot of people probably bought the game. I will say, like, if you bought it digital, then this definitely doesn't matter, but I sometimes really enjoy when we have a really big title like that join, if only because whether I have it on disc or not, I get to claim it, and so it sits on the console digitally, and if I ever do want to launch it and play it, then I sort of reap the reward of the big digital benefit, which is not having to get up and swap discs. Which that doesn't bother me, but if I can get that alongside ownership, then I'll obviously take it. And then when it leaves the service, I don't care because I still have the game. So not too bad for sure. I would say July is looking really strong. Now, in other PS Plus news, we also got a very small story about how in some cases for the classic games, it's actually the publisher reaching out to Sony. So we heard about that for the somewhat recent edition of Battle Engine Aquila, which kind of came out of nowhere for PS2, right? And so we found out that that game got onto the service because the publisher pitched it. So Ziggurat Interactive producer Alex Lotz told Push Square, and I quote here, "Ziggurat approached Sony about bringing the game to the PlayStation Classics catalog. The in-house emulation team at PlayStation handled the core development, while Ziggurat had review and approval on the builds, publishing materials, and network features like trophies." Now, I would imagine that still is referencing implicit conversions, unless there is a smaller portion of the team at Asahi that also handles a few of those things. But for the most part, that is how implicit does operate, is that they have a list of things that they can offer to a prospective publisher, like trophies, for example, and that kind of goes into the pricing and the royalty situation for that game, and that's usually how those things work out. I would expect that more often than not, it is implicit in Sony having to scout out, publishing opportunities, but it should go without saying that the reverse can happen as well. I'd be very curious to see how often that does happen, because I would think Battle Engine Aquila is not the norm, I would say. Next up, we have a new PS4 system software update, this one being 12.52, and this one is not improving the system software performance or the readability and usability on some screens. It's instead making some security fixes to the system software, which is probably going to be, I would think, not super common, but maybe the only thing PS4 is really going to see outside of those stability and usability updates, things like that. Either that or also parental control updates if they still care about doing those for PS4's legacy years now at this point, which, arguably it's kind of already in. The vast majority of PlayStation owners now are playing and engaging on PlayStation 5. But in this case, I would think, they're just going to be cleaning up some of those loopholes, any sort of bug bounties that are discovered and submitted to SIE, because that is something they're going to try and tie up as PS4 is still somewhat relevant for what is a very internet-connected console. Let's move on to Astro Bot's 5 new levels, which are live right now on PSN. So again, not a weekly thing. All 5 levels are just ready to go on the game where you load it up, and you'll see the new section appear to you. And we won't say too much else because the news is that it's more of a spoiler. Just that I will say, yes, there are some VIP bots in here that I think arguably a lot of people were wondering why were they not in the original game or any subsequent update to the game. And it would appear as though like this is probably the sort of, I guess, final send-off for the game, as in like they're probably moving on or we might not see any more updates to this game. If I had to guess, I would think these last 5 levels were maybe something that they ended up doing after a lot of the positive reception came in and they got so many awards and maybe this particular publisher was finally willing to play ball. But either way, I'll just say it was really cool to finally have these in the game. So the new Astro Bot content is out there. Go play it and check it out. Moving on to some Naughty Dog news, where we have a very surprising update, free update for The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered on PS5 and PC, and it's the Chronological experience, which is just that, a way to play the Part 2 campaign in chronological order, which most people know at this point. One big issue a lot of people did have with the game when it came out is that the story is told in a very non-linear fashion. Not only are flashbacks sort of picked apart and spread throughout the entire campaign, but you do play a good portion of the game as Ellie, then transitioning over to Abby, and then going back to Ellie. There's a lot of, going back and forth, but for some, like, that was an issue. And so this is something where Naughty Dog worked in collaboration with Nixxes Software, so they primarily did most of the work on this. And, Nixxes has now been doing a lot of stuff outside of just the PlayStation Studio PC port, so they've done this. They're handling the Helldivers 2 Xbox port, and they did Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and so now they're doing this. Definitely some new original content, or in theory, right, depending on how you phrase it, but there's that. There is going to be new trophies tied to this mode as well, and you can also unlock a Nathan Drake and Sam Drake outfit for Joel and Tommy in the No Return mode, and again, it's available right now on PS5 and PC. I did not expect we would ever get something quite like this. It's really interesting, and I have seen a number of people, anecdotal as it is, saying that, you know what, I might actually try this now, because that was, for some people, definitely like their problem with where motives are placed, where those pivotal cutscenes and flashbacks are placed. Then maybe this is something where it's worth revisiting the game and giving it a second chance. I will say for me, I saw this news and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I would not play this. Although, in fairness, it does have trophies, so I guess I will eventually do it, but not a high priority for me. But my initial thought was, like, this is really cool as an option. I don't want to play the game like that. If only because, like, yeah, it's going to be really front-loaded with a lot of slower scenes and slower-paced sections until you get to the a lot of the action in Seattle. But also, like I didn't have a problem with how the story was told. I mean, to be frank, I didn't have any issues with the game, period. Some minor ones, but for the most part, I'm kind of the opinion of it is just a masterclass in video games. But the thing is, watching the Season 2 premiere of, well, not just the premiere, the entire season of the HBO series, and that is still the same non-linear approach. It's going to be primarily Ellie. It's going to be going to Abby, and then it's going to go back to Ellie for probably the Santa Barbara portion. But, that, like, functionally, it's still all the same. It's just that they did move motives up and cutscenes around, and very important scenes were pushed all the way upward. And that, to me, I think wasn't the right call. Looking back at how Part 2 did approach it, I have a bit more conviction personally of the idea that I think the way they approached it was, I don't know if it was necessarily the best or right choice, but it worked for me. And that's all I can really say. In my experience, that was not my issue with the game. So, and Season 2, if anything, really sort of proved that for me. Because during the whole conversation surrounding when that game came out, I'm like, I don't really know how I'd feel if it was maybe told in different events. But watching it live action, where it was moved around just a little bit, I started to think, you know what? Yeah, I kind of prefer how the game did it. Let's move on to the Ghost of Yotei State of Play gameplay deep dive, which aired just yesterday, and we have 20 minutes of new footage, details, and console accessories, a lot of things to go over. So first and foremost, they do open up the state of play by reiterating that this does focus on an open world bigger than any other Sucker Punch game they've ever made. So some things you can do when you're going through the plot line and exploring the open world. You can interrogate enemies to get clues and follow leads, which looked really interesting. You've got the Altars of Reflection. These are new shrines you can visit for new abilities. There's still the bamboo shoots to slice and then the hot springs to visit as well, so that will still augment and improve Atsu over time. As far as gameplay, they did really reiterate this, that Atsu will use any dirty trick to win a fight. So there's seemingly no honor, which I think is in stark contrast to Tsushima, where that was really tied into the plot line of you could go into every sort of engagement, every fight with the honor of a samurai, or you can be the ghost and start to sneak around and use said dirty tricks. But they're really trying to punch this point across home that Atsu, as far as the story goes, she is on a revenge mission. So you are encouraged to use as many dirty tricks as possible and seeing all the different weapons. And it's the same sort of gameplay premise as far as when you get into those combat scenarios where you have to use different weapons for different enemies. We did see that Atsu can disarm enemies, or she herself can get disarmed as well. We did not see much of the wolf or firearms. They showed very little, so it seems like that's one thing that Sucker Punch is keeping closer to themselves, or maybe we'll learn more about that closer to launch. Going through the open world, you can also camp under the stars, and this lets you cook and play music. Or one really cool idea they're doing here is that people can approach you during your campfire, and those are very important people that you have to meet for possibly following certain leads, or they can approach you with upgrades as well. Then there's also the wolf pack section, so this is a new way to track characters and if they have new upgrades for you or tasks. And there's also a lot of customization. They showed a little bit of this as well, and there's a lot. I do not remember Tsushima letting you mess around with Jin quite like what we're doing with Atsu here, so you can really get kind of nutty and dress her up however you want. They also showed a lot of the original score being recorded and directed, with the composer being Toma Otoa, and they did confirm they're doubling down on photo mode. That will be there day one, alongside the full Japanese dialogue with lip sync, so available day one. And also Kurosawa mode is back as well, but there's also two new modes, which is Mikkei mode, the director of 13 Assassins. This is where you can play the game with the camera zoomed in a bit more. There is more blood splatter and mud being thrown around. And then there's also Watanabe mode, which is the director of Samurai Champloo. So this is where lo-fi beats are going to play during exploration and combat. That sounds incredible. And then they ended off the state of play by announcing limited edition PS5 console bundles and controllers, and pre-orders are live right now. Yōtei is $69.99 USD, and those console bundles, the controllers, also the console covers separately. All the details are on the PS blog, so that's kind of split up for the black and gold versions. So depending on where you want to get those, you'll have to look at certain retailer options and things like that. I'll probably display a screenshot for you. But otherwise, that is everything that we've learned about Yōtei so far. I will say, based off that, I really like these sort of somewhat thorough gameplay deep dives. You can tell, like, oh, we didn't see much firearms. We didn't see a lot of this wolf thing, which surely probably plays a much bigger role, but it's these very quick snippets of gameplay. Usually it's always nice to have something where it's like uninterrupted combat sequences for like 5 of 10 minutes or something, and I always appreciate those. But doing like, 15, 20 minutes, but here's like a very quick overview of all these different elements and things that we're trying out. If this is the last thing they showed us, I'm in. I'm done. Good. I'll get the game. It looks fantastic. But surely they'll talk more and say more as we get closer to the release in October. But based on what we're seeing so far, it looks like a bigger and better Tsushima. Although in many ways it does seem like they're experimenting just a little bit. I do find it definitely interesting that they really have gone out of their way to say, like, Atsu is just going to be playing dirty tricks left and right. There is no honor here. She is going to build this reputation as the Onryo, and everyone's going to eventually just see you and go, oh boy, here comes trouble. So if anything, they're kind of leaning more into that, which is a good thing, just in the sense that by the time you finished Tsushima, there was that weird thing of like, well, you're given this sort of choice all throughout the game of how to approach combat, but it swings a certain way no matter what anyway. So maybe that's this is how they're acknowledging it. So all that sounds great. The Samurai Champloo mode, the Watanabe mode, oh my god, that sounds incredible. Can I just gush about that for a second? I will say I won't play the game like that, but I will do post cleanup like that. Like when the plot line's done and I can sort of just vibe and have fun and trophy hunt. Oh, absolutely, that is getting played. I hope that is something where you can just toggle that on and off. I really hope it's not kind of a point of no return. You have to choose to do it from the very onset or not. But if you can just sort of toggle that on and off at will, oh my god, that sounds so cool. So happy to see that being included as well. Moving on to some Death Stranding 2 on the beach impressions, because I am finally getting some time in on this game, so I wanted to at least talk a little bit about it for my experience with the game. I know some are already completely done with the game, or they're wrapping up their platinum or trophies, so I try to be a little bit thorough, or keep up with everybody else's pace of playing these games right when they drop, but at the very minimum, let me at least share my experience so far. No spoilers, but man, I'll tell you this. I'm back in, baby. Oh my god, loving it so much. Very few complaints. I guess I'll open with the only complaint I really have right now, which, or two, three-ish complaints. One, I was really looking forward to that sort of Death Stranding experience of when you're making a long delivery and you get to the end of that delivery and a song kicks in. I don't know if it's because the novelty of it is over, but like that's already happened on a few occasions for my first 20-something hours into the game, and it just didn't really hit like the first game did, and I think that is kind of the novelty of the first time you play DS1. It might also be because this game sort of doesn't waste your time if you've played the first game, so, you know, there's only a handful of deliveries initially where you really have to do them on foot. You really sort of get back into that gameplay loop of a very disciplined and experienced porter, which is what Sam is. So you get the vehicles pretty quick, you get your weapons back pretty quick, and you sort of get back into the swing of things as far as making deliveries a lot faster. And so by the time you have those sort of song sequences come in from a long delivery, like I'm already driving to the destination or something, and I don't know, just it didn't really sort of resonate with me the same way the first game did, which was more disappointing. What was also semi-disappointing is, like, this game is undeniably more combat-focused. There are many sequences now where, like, you should be using weapons and guns and shooting down all these enemies that you run into. At first, I didn't like that. I'm like, you know what? I don't mind just doing deliveries and having the long walking portions and things like that. That might be more of a personal preference kind of thing. With more time in the game, I'm starting to appreciate those combat sequences even more, in that I want to do them. They can all still be avoided primarily. You can just walk around things, no problem. But that was really maybe the only minor gripes I had. Otherwise, I'm back in. Like, it's so fun to be doing deliveries again in this game, and it looks unbelievably gorgeous. It's just so jaw-dropping. Not even so much from how dense and lush the game looks, but, you know, these cutscenes, man, they just... Like, I got to the portion where I meet Rainey. Again, no spoilers, but I just have the Rainey introduction. Or the episode 5 introduction with the, you know, separate character that's very similar to, like, Mad Mikkelsen or something, right? And just the animations, facial expressions... It's just, I'm sitting here like smiling and almost giddy with excitement for just how gorgeous the game looks. It's insane. What was also quite notable to me, and I don't know if anybody else felt the same way, the game is sort of, like, it's very serious, but it's also very goofy, which is a Kojima thing. It's also, in a way, I don't know if it's like fourth wall breaking, but it feels very... Gosh, what's the best way to describe this? It feels like a PS1, PS2 sequel in a way, as far as the storytelling goes. Like, it opens very tragic, don't get me wrong. If you've played, you know. But it's also like, I don't know, the read to me is just, I love the dichotomy of, this is a gorgeous-looking, high-budget PlayStation 5 exclusive. It really does look jaw-dropping. It's, you know, undeniably, I think, even on a Pro, like a sort of standout title of, this is what it looks like to play on PlayStation 5. But there's also that other end of, like, the story just sort of, in a way, forces itself of, like, DS1 could have been a thing and that's it. But here, it's just so funny how it's so formulaic with, like, a lot of older PS1 and PS2 sequels were back in the day. In that there's a very simple idea of, hey, all that stuff you did before, we just want you to do it again. And that's how it's sort of presented to you. As Fragile, you know, comes back to you and she's just like, yeah, like, we want you to just do all that stuff over again. And it really is as simple as that, and it read to me as like a sort of silly, like, PS1, PS2 sequel. You know, that's just like how the storytelling went with those games. Hey, all that stuff you did before, I'm sorry to say, but you have to do it again. We need you back to do it again. And I don't know, it just, in a way, I really liked that. So far, I'm just having a great time with the game, and I want to play more of it, that's for sure. I don't want to be here right now talking to you all doing this. I want to get back to my playthrough. Let's get into some third-party news. The Final Fantasy IX 25th anniversary has come and gone, and not much has happened, because that was something a lot of people were looking forward to, is this possibility of an announcement for this rumored remake or remaster project, whatever this thing does look like. Actually, we're hearing that maybe it's in trouble. We'll have to wait and see. But, you know, it was on July 7th, so Square did reveal some new merchandise and new artwork and a special anniversary movie that uses scenes from the original game. But over on Reset Era, Nate Drake, or Nate the Hate, who's been privy to a lot of this stuff lately, did provide a small update where they talk about what they've heard. And they did say the last time they checked in on the development, it's still in development as far as they're aware, but they need to do a fresh check and see what a more current status is, because they did hear about a month ago that it was in trouble and possibly canceled. They only had one source on the cancellation possibility and need further info to validate that. I would be surprised if this game was in trouble, if only because I feel like what we've heard so far about the game is that it's not a full-blown remake. It's sort of similar to what they did with Crisis Core, which is arguably really blurring the lines between a remaster and a remake, and I think a lot of people would be very happy with maybe just that, unless they are looking to do a lot more with the game. Yeah, I'll tell you, 9 is something I've spent very little time with. I've never finished it, and I've always been meaning to get back to it, but every so often when 9 pops up, and certainly for this recent 25th anniversary, you know, the fans come out in droves, and it encourages me to get a playthrough done on that game to see just how special it really is. But unfortunately, another situation where an anniversary comes and goes, and as we often say, those anniversary dates, they're fun, they're special, but they can be very arbitrary as far as trying to align an announcement with projects, you know what I mean? So that doesn't mean the game's totally done, but we'll have to just keep watching this rumor and see how it plays out. Now, we also have an update on Romero Games, where if you remember, they had a bit of a falling out from those Microsoft layoffs, which they're still not saying who their publishing partner was, but there has been a lot of back and forth surrounding the status of the studio, so they themselves did put out a statement just to clear the air on what's going on. So they did say that yes, funding was pulled, the game was canceled. They still won't name their publisher, but they actually did meet with them a day before, and they had no idea this was coming, so that really does illustrate just how often this stuff happens, where only a few senior high-ranking people make these very tough decisions, and then all the studios, even senior leadership at said studios, they might be meeting with, you know, a coordinator or something just for a status update, a site visit, whatever the case is, but somebody far above all of them will make that call, which is unfortunate. But they did say that they're reassessing the entire staffing and they're not closed, and right now they've already been contacted by several publishers and are evaluating their opportunities. Not to say Sony could be one of them, but you would think that a lot of people are sort of looking into the project now, the status, how much more funding they'll need to get the project over the finish line, and based on how far along they are, maybe we'll see this game actually still come out of the other side of this. Next up, Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl was finally confirmed for PlayStation 5, coming later this year, so late 2025 is the release timeline. It will support PS5 Pro and the DualSense haptics and triggers, and this story is particularly noteworthy because this is really, as far as I know, and it might be the case forever now, this is the last big AAA third-party exclusive that Microsoft had locked down for Xbox platforms back when Series S and X were about to come out, or around that timeline is when they initially signed this game on, which the game itself was supposed to launch back in like mid-2022. It saw multiple delays, obviously, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But if you recall, we had this pop up back in, I want to say it was 2021, maybe late 2020, but we had some leaked documentation come out which showed this game as a signed exclusive with Microsoft for, I think it was like 3 to 6 months at a minimum or something like that. But, you know, that was around the time. Granted, 4 years ago doesn't seem that long ago, but that was when Microsoft was still very committed, or rather Team Xbox was still very committed to competing in the traditional console space and doing traditional console business tactics like locking down third-party exclusives, signing them on, and you just have to think that, okay, the game is finally making its way to PS5, but I mean, is this not maybe the last time we'll ever see this from the Microsoft side of things? How motivated are they really to do deals like this when their own first-party software is multi-platform? They are completely moving on to shipping on competitors. So are they going to be signing big AAA third-party exclusives anymore? I don't think so. So Stalker might be the last game that was sort of a holdout there, and now it will be making its way over. I just thought that was one of the more pivotal moments in gaming history if Stalker 2 does end up being kind of the last agreement like that. Moving on to some adjacent Xbox-esque news, but we had this really big thing play out over the weekend and going into the weekday about Game Pass, but also how that relates to PS Plus. So basically this initially opened with the Arcane Studios founder talking about how they prefer PS Plus over Game Pass. That was one catalyst to the entire thing, really, but over on Twitter we did have Rafael Colantonio say, "Why is nobody talking about the elephant in the room? Cough, cough, Game Pass." So this was in light of the mass layoffs at Microsoft, which Rafael said they think it's an unsustainable model that's been damaging the industry. And then Michael Douse from Larian chimed in saying that this has been a concern in his network. It's the most vocal one, and it's the economic reasons people they know have not shifted to its business model. Then Michael, in the same thread, said they much prefer Sony's lifecycle management strategy. Eventually, this snowballed into this huge revelation from Christopher Dring, formerly of GamesIndustry.biz, now running the game business, that Microsoft was not including the cost of first party into Game Pass, and that was eventually clarified that based on sources, Game Pass is profitable, even accounting for lost sales for its first party games, and this is also before publishing on PlayStation 5. So that popped up from both Chris in a long thread, or rather one long tweet clarifying his own statement, and then Jez Corden writing for Windows Central, where he put up a post, and based on sources from Jez, the Game Pass profit and loss statements factor in per title retail performance. So Game Pass gets charged a forecasted lost sales segment, and what they don't factor in is development costs. But there's been a big, conversation back and forth, the long-standing debate of Game Pass and its sustainability. The Phil Spencer quote from mid-2022 is around the time where he started saying that Game Pass is profitable. Prior to that, it was always sustainable. Now it's profitable, and it was always, at least there was a big topic for debate there when it initially came out that, they're not including first-party costs in some way. But that really sort of gets into a whole can of worms as far as just basic profit and loss statements. So considering games have so many different verticals surrounding them when it comes to the long-standing development cycle, the resources that go into it, it's primarily salaries, which is the cost, but then the games can be monetized so much further, so it's not necessarily just Game Pass, which that's the argument being made, is that if the games were exclusive to Game Pass, then the dev cost would make a lot more sense to be factored into the P&L statement. But when you consider the games have its own separate retail forecast on a studio by studio basis, title by title basis, they can be monetized from a la carte sales, now shipping on PS5 as well, and then any sort of monetization they do after the fact. There's just a lot that sort of goes into it. But presumably what we're hearing based on sources is that the P&L does, at least at the very minimum, include some cannibalization of sales against Game Pass, and that's included in the forecast. And Game Pass, for the time being, is still profitable. But really, that's neither here nor there. Sure, Game Pass can be profitable to a degree, and Microsoft has a responsibility to shareholders, and when they put out statements to investors, they can't lie about those things, or at least more often than not, they can't lie in such a degree where they're omitting very important information or making it look better than it actually is. Although most public companies will certainly try to do that. That's why oftentimes they will, if they don't confirm sales of a console, if they don't confirm sales of a certain product or a certain game, they'll speak in different numbers, which makes it sound a lot better than it really is. So, percentage-wise, we sold this many more consoles versus the last quarter or something, which is not the case for Microsoft right now. That's just an example. But they will talk in percentages, or they will talk in, not unit sales, but players. We have had so many players on this game over a 24-hour period, 2-week period or something, and they can lump all the Game Pass players into that, so it makes it sound a lot better than it really is. That's how all that stuff normally goes. But the point is, whether Game Pass is profitable or not, it still dials back to the original comments from Raphael and Michael from, again, both Arcane and Larian about what it means for every player involved, right? So, it's one thing to say, how is Microsoft going to make the numbers work for them? Apparently it is. That's all well and good for them, but it's still the argument to be made of what it's doing for the rest of the industry and the game creators. And it seems like more often than not, we've been seeing more accounts of this stuff not really working out for the game creators that are signing these deals. Now, they were incredibly lucrative for the first 1 or 2 years, certainly from the PS Plus relaunch, and then for as long as Game Pass has been getting really aggressive. But now we've seen the past 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, just when they were really tightening up the budget and the lucrative Game Pass deals were starting to dry up. Same with PS Plus. And in fact, there's even bad stories about PS Plus that are out there. I mean, the most noteworthy one would have been Lauren Laning when he, was very vocal about how Oddworld Soulstorm, they kind of got burned on that deal, if only because it was a little bit circumstantial on they had to delay the game because that's when COVID was kicking off, and so they needed more time to actually ship the game. They signed a PS Plus deal that accounted for a certain number of PS5s that were available to the market at the time, and so what they were paid was reflective of the install base. By the time they shipped the game, way more people were able to claim and download the game. I think they said we had 4 million players or something at the time. A la carte sales would have been 50,000 minimum, but maybe that would have been a little bit more. Just the point is the bargaining chips would have looked a lot different with how many more people claimed the game, but they already inked a deal. Right, so that's just one example of how even PS Plus, it can kind of turn south for a game creator. But I guess it's noteworthy that you've got two players in the business that are at least a little more forthcoming with Sony's approach of this very, life cycle based subscription service, which is primarily a lot of older stuff. They do sign some day and date titles, but it's really not that often. We've seen from Jim Ryan's comments back in 2022, 23, I think is when he also made another one, but they're very forward about this, and they've said it recently as well. We are not putting first-party games on subscription. It just doesn't really work for us, which, how is it working for Microsoft and not Sony, even when apparently the Microsoft number is accounting for this would have been prior to shipping on PS5, so surely it's working out much better for them now with shipping on PS5, but if they were still doing okay without shipping on a competing platform, even bearing all the, liabilities of all these studios they've acquired, the Sony side of things, there's still that opportunity cost. Their opportunity cost is a lot higher than Microsoft in theory on their own platforms. When Yōtei ships and they end up selling 5 to 10 million something copies or whatever the case is, they can't necessarily afford to lose those if all those players are accessing the game via PS Plus. So, it's always dependent on the situation, but there's still that argument of Game Pass has been conditioning customers to not buy games, which is definitely problematic in this environment where every company is really struggling to get your time for what is a very content-based ecosystem, or rather, nowadays the business model leans more on live service and also competing against other entertainment platforms like Facebook and YouTube, and TikTok is a big one that's eating up a lot of time in the market. So to not have these games be bought in it's all cyclical, and it's kind of, that's what makes the business so much tougher nowadays. But with that in mind, I guess that's where we are right now. It was cool to hear that stuff about Game Pass, but at the same time, the damage will still be done if we do see this effect continue to permeate throughout customer habits, if they do start to gain some traction with the service beyond the 35 million something subscribers they're at, and it's been kind of stuck for a while, but it might not be a good thing if they were able to grow that outside of console. Let's move on to a big update for the Stop Killing Games initiative, which has reached 1.3 million signatures, so it's got a decent buffer for the 1 million threshold that it needs to be over to be officially presented to EU regulators. And one of the leads for the project, Ross, did caution that there is going to be a lot of signatures that will be invalidated just based off people signing up incorrectly or they're not actual residents. So they do need a very safe buffer for this to actually go through. But we have a big update here, which is not very surprising. A lobbying body in Europe, Video Games Europe, is opposing the proposition, which, yes, this body does have members on their board, which includes Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony. They are members alongside other very big established publishers, but they did release a statement, and they released this statement on July 7th, where they say, and I quote here, "We appreciate the passion of our community. However, the decision to discontinue online services is multifaceted, never taken lightly, and must be an option for companies when an online experience is no longer commercially viable. We understand that it can be disappointing for players, but when it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice of the prospective changes in compliance with local consumer protection laws. private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as the protections we put in place to secure players' data, remove illegal content, and combat unsafe community content would not exist and would leave rights holders liable. In addition, many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. We welcome the opportunity to discuss our position with policymakers and those who have led the European Citizens Initiative in the coming months. Now, I will be the first to say that if this does actually get presented and EU regulators take a look at this, it is going to be probably one of those things where you've got two, opposing groups here trying to make a case to people that don't really fundamentally understand even what's being proposed to them, right? So that's, on its own going to be a massive problem, because most of the statement they put out is, of course, ridiculous and absurd, and it always comes down to a liability thing. But we have examples right here, right now, that show existing disc-based games from the PS3 days, or plenty of things on PC. Like if there is some sort of offline client playable build to a degree that people do still have and is not tied to any sort of DRM, it's just given in the hands of communities, private servers. They police themselves essentially, and there's different groups that pop up all the time. And if anything, there's just even drama within those of people that tend to restore communities, and sometimes they like to keep it closed source and they don't release that info. And so it's all community driven, and they police themselves, generally speaking. So we all know that it's ridiculous, and it's always the liability argument, and it's not like they can't include that language in their own terms of service to absolve them of those liabilities. That's the whole point of really long terms of service, is to absolve yourself of any issues. It very much is still about all that control that the IP holders like to have, especially in this environment of these very online stores and these games that are built from the ground up, in a sense where there is no build that is ever given to you in such a manner where it has a playable offline client. But the movement is not asking for those things, obviously, when it comes to support that's unreasonable beyond expectation, right? So we all know that it's ridiculous, but at the same time, this is going to be a very tough uphill battle for anything to really get done, or at least for this to be telegraphed to those that are going to make these decisions in the EU of why this is important and why it can be very safely and responsibly curtailed, and these rights being given back to people that buy and play video games. So I would like to remain optimistic, but it's going to be really tough for them to get over that hurdle. But my lord, am I very impressed to see the movement get as far as it has. And gosh, it would be absolutely incredible if we did see some kind of regulation that has a downstream effect on games released globally. Next up, Tokyo Game Show 2025 has confirmed a lot of partners and exhibitors for this year's event, and it will be the biggest TGS in the event's history. And yes, we can say that Sony will be there again, which is great to see. Now, based on when TGS happens, you would think they're probably going to do a lot of promotion for Ghost of Yotei and having that on the show floor, but we could also see Marvel ToeCon, so we should have a lot of info coming out of TGS this year. But it is good to see that Sony will be there again, and who knows, maybe by the time TGS does come around, if Sony does say something or announce something prior, we could see that appear at TGS as well. It's just really cool to have them back at TGS on, hopefully, an annual basis again. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was a conversation about the big multi-platform approach Sony has nowadays, especially with Helldivers 2 on Xbox. So what does that mean for the PlayStation business and consoles and PlayStation 6 more broadly? Wanted to have a quick talk there. And then coming up, we have a ClickR3 probably going live very soon, so we're finally getting back into ClickR3 now that me and John are back from TMG and settled back in, and probably another Tuesday video as well, but that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.